There is a moment, and if you are honest with yourself, you know exactly the moment I am talking about, where you looked around at your life, at the world spinning chaotically around you, and felt something that no one around you seemed to feel. A pull, a pressure behind the chest, a knowing that did not come from logic or education or anything anyone ever taught you. It was older than all of that. It came from somewhere beneath thought, beneath language, beneath the identity you were every single day. And in that moment, maybe only for a second, maybe only for a breath, you wondered, why do I feel so different from everyone else? Why does it feel like I was made for something I haven't found yet? Why does ordinary life feel like a costume that doesn't quite fit? If you have ever asked yourself any version of that question, if that resonance is moving through you right now, then you need to understand something before this video is over. You did not end up here by accident. The ancient books, the mystery schools, the sacred texts that survived thousands of years of war, empire, and censorship, they all describe a certain type of soul, a soul that arrives in the world already carrying something, already different, already marked, and whether the world has told you you are special, or whether it has spent years trying to convince you that you are nothing, the truth remains. It was written long before you were born, and today we are going to read it together. Part or Northeast, the ancient language of the chosen, long before modern psychology had words for it, long before self-help shelves existed, long before motivational speakers stood under spotlights trying to bottle something they could barely feel themselves. The ancient world had a very specific language for what you are experiencing. In Egypt, they called it Neter, the divine principle that breathes through a human vessel and causes that vessel to act beyond the limits of ordinary humanity. In Vedic tradition, they spoke of Dharma not merely as duty, but as the cosmic assignment that a specific soul agreed to carry before incarnating into physical form. In Gnostic Christianity, they described pneumatics, those rare human beings who carry a spark of divine fire that the material world cannot fully extinguish no matter how hard it tries. In Taoism, they described souls who were aligned with the Ti, the power that flows through all things in a way that made their very presence a force of transformation. In indigenous shamanic traditions across every continent on Earth, they understood that certain souls are born as bridges between worlds, between times, between what is and what could be. Across every culture, in every era, with wildly different vocabularies and symbols and rituals, humanity has always recognized one truth. Not all souls come here with the same assignment. Some come to maintain, some come to receive, and some rare, misunderstood, often isolated, often tested beyond what seems fair, come to transform. And the books, the scrolls, the oral traditions, the mystery schools, they all agree on how to recognize which category you fall into, not by your achievements, not by your reputation, by what lives inside you when everything outside of you falls apart. Part to the signs that were written about you, The ancient Hermetic texts, those attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, the master of masters, describe a certain profile of soul with remarkable precision. These texts, some dating back over 4,000 years, speak of those who feel the world more deeply than others as a sign of divine appointment, not personal weakness. In the modern world, you might have been told you are too sensitive, too emotional, too intense, too serious, too much, but the ancient texts say something different. They say that hidden feeling is a form of perception, that the one who is shaken by injustice, moved by beauty, disturbed by suffering, and electrified by truth, that one is not broken, that one is awake. The Zohar, the central text of Kabbalistic mysticism, describes certain souls as Neshama Yetira, souls who descended from a higher plane of divine light and therefore feel a permanent, aching homesickness that the things of this world can never fully satisfy. You may have felt this. You may have stood in the middle of a perfectly good life with people who love you, with comforts all around you, and still felt this hollow, inexplicable longing for something you cannot name. The Zohar does not call this depression. It calls this remembrance. It says the soul that longs most deeply for God, for truth, for source, for whatever name you give to the infinite, is the soul that was closest to it before this life began. Your longing is not a sign of lack. It is a sign of origin. Part 3: The Trial of the Chosen, O Northeast. Here is what none of the motivational posters will tell you. Here is what the ancient books do not hide, even though modern spirituality often tries to soften it. The path of the chosen one in every tradition, in every culture, in every story ever told, runs directly through the fire. Joseph was thrown into a pit by his own brothers before he became the man who saved nations. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before he heard the burning bush. Buddha sat a day beneath the Bodhi tree and faced the full force of Mara, fear, doubt, desire, and illusion before he touched enlightenment. Jesus spent 40 days in the desert, tempted and tested, before his ministry began. Muhammad received the first revelation in a cave alone, trembling with terror, before he became the seal of the prophets. In every esoteric tradition, this is called the initiation. The Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece structured it deliberately initiates were plunged into darkness, made to confront death, stripped of every illusion about who they were, before they could receive the light. The ancient Egyptians built it into the architecture of the pyramids, the descending passage leading down into the earth, into the darkness of the king's chamber, before the ascending passage led back up to the light. The message is always the same. You cannot carry the light until you have survived the dark. And if your life has broken you in places you didn't even know could break, if you have lost things you thought were permanent, if you have been misunderstood by those you most loved, if you have stood alone in circumstances that didn't make sense, then you are not being punished. You are being prepared. Part 4: Why the Chosen, or Northeast, is Al Washington Wyeth misunderstood. One of the most painful and least discussed aspects of carrying this kind of soul is the isolation. Not always physical isolation, though sometimes that too, but the deeper kind. The isolation of knowing that when you try to explain what you feel, what you see, what you know, the people around you look at you with a kind of polite confusion that tells you everything you need to know. The ancient Gnostic texts spoke of the archons not necessarily as literal beings, but as forces within the social world that actively suppress the awakening of divine consciousness, because awakened consciousness cannot be controlled, cannot be herded, cannot be sold the lies that keep systems of power running smoothly. Throughout history, the mystics, the prophets, the visionaries were not persecuted because they were wrong. They were persecuted because they were inconveniently right. Socrates was executed not for corrupting youth, but for asking questions that exposed the emptiness of authority. Joan of Arc was burned not because she was delusional, but because a teenage girl hearing divine guidance and acting on it was too threatening to ignore. Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake not because the church feared error, but because they feared his truth. And on a smaller, quieter scale, in offices, in families, in friend groups, in classrooms, this same dynamic plays out every single day. The one who sees differently is isolated. The one who asks why is mocked. The one who refuses to settle is called unstable. But the ancient books know something about this too. The Book of Enoch, one of the oldest surviving Jewish texts, says that those who are given vision must expect to walk alone for a season, not forever, but for long enough to learn that the voice of the divine within them is louder and more reliable than the voices of the crowd around them. Part 5. The Ancient Tea of Self-Origin. The Upanishads, the ancient Indian philosophical texts that form the foundation of Hindu spiritual thought, composed over 3,000 years ago, contain a phrase that changed the world: Tatum Asi. You are that, not you will become that if you work hard enough. Not you might achieve that if you follow the right rules. You are that right now, in this moment, underneath everything you have been told about yourself, beneath every failure, every wound, every embarrassing memory, every moment of shame or doubt or confusion. The ancient seers are saying the thing you are looking for has never left you. The reason this matters for you is this: the chosen one in ancient understanding is never chosen because they are better than others. They are chosen because they are willing to look inward when the world looks outward, willing to question when the world demands answers, willing to feel when the world demands numbness, willing to remember when the world demands forgetting. The Corpus Hermeticum, one of the foundational texts of Western esotericism, puts it this way: the mind is of God, and the soul of the mind, and the soul in man forms God. That is not metaphor. The ancient teachers meant that literally. The divine intelligence does not sit outside of you in a distant heaven, watching from afar. It is your mind, your awareness, your consciousness, and the one who knows this truly knows it, not just as an idea but as lived experience, is the one the ancient texts called illuminated. Not enlightened in some faraway future sense, illuminated now, in this body, in this life, reading these words. Part 6: The Sacred Duty of Knowing. There is a teaching that runs through every mystery school tradition that deserves to be said plainly, because modern spirituality often softens it to the point of losing its power entirely. Knowing who you are is not a luxury. It is not self-indulgence. It is not narcissism dressed in spiritual language. According to the ancient traditions, from the Pythagorean schools of ancient Greece to the Sufi mystical orders of Islam to the Kabbalistic circles of medieval Spain to the shamanic traditions of the Americas, knowing yourself is the most sacred act a human being can perform. The oracle at Delphi did not inscribe "Know thyself" above its entrance as a casual suggestion. It was the foundational commandment of the entire ancient world's spiritual life, because they understood something that our distraction-saturated, productivity-obsessed, identity-confused modern world has almost entirely forgotten. A person who does not know what they are becomes a tool for forces that do know what they want. When you don't know your own power, someone else will use it. When you don't know your own worth, someone else will define it. When you don't know your own purpose, you will spend your life serving someone else's. The ancient books do not describe the chosen one as someone who stumbles into greatness by accident. They describe someone who undertakes the courageous, painful, glorious work of self-excavation, digging through every layer of conditioning, every story they were told about who they are and who they aren't, until they reach something that cannot be dug further into because it has no bottom. It is not a thing. It is the digger itself. It is the awareness that watches all of it. And when you find that, you will know, because it is the only thing in your entire experience that does not change. Everything else moves. That does not. Part 7: The Pattern That Repeats Across All Ages. If you study the biographies of the greatest mystics, teachers, healers, leaders, artists, and visionaries in human history, not the sanitized versions taught in schools, but the real ones, the raw ones, the ones that include the breakdowns and the loneliness and the years of incomprehension, you will notice something that is so consistent it cannot be coincidence. Every single one of them went through a period of profound destruction before they stepped into their role. Carl Jung called it individuation. The painful process of shedding the false self constructed to please the world and encountering the real self underneath. St. John of the Cross called it the dark night of the soul, that terrifying, disorientating period when all the props of ordinary spiritual comfort are stripped away and the soul is left naked in the dark, with nothing but raw faith to stand on. In shamanic cultures, this is called the shamanic death, the symbolic, or sometimes literal near-death experience through which the shaman-to-be must pass before they receive the power to heal others. In alchemical tradition, this is called negredo, the blackening, the putrefaction, the dissolution, the stage that must happen before the gold can emerge. The pattern is the same in every language, every century, every culture, and it is the pattern that explains why the most difficult seasons of your life are not proof that something has gone wrong with you. They are proof that something very important is happening inside you. The universe does not destroy what it does not intend to rebuild at a higher level. The fire that burns your old life down is not your enemy. It is the forge, and you, though it may not have felt like it when you were inside it, you are the gold. Part 8: The Ancient Map of Your Destiny. The ancient Egyptians had a concept called Ma'at, often translated as truth, justice, or cosmic order, but in its deepest meaning, Ma'at was the principle that every being in the universe has a right relationship to existence, a role, a resonance, a shape that fits perfectly into the larger pattern of all that is. To live in Ma'at was to live in alignment with your true nature. To violate Ma'at was not merely to sin, it was to exist in friction with the fundamental order of reality itself. And the symptoms of violating Ma'at look remarkably like what millions of people call depression, anxiety, meaninglessness, burnout, and quiet desperation. When you are not living as what you truly are, when you are performing a version of yourself designed to please others rather than express your genuine nature, your nervous system knows, your body knows, something deep in the architecture of your being knows, and it speaks in the language of discomfort, dissatisfaction, exhaustion, and longing. The ancient Egyptian priests understood this. Their entire civilization for 3,000 years, the longest-lasting complex civilization in human history, was built on the principle that the highest act of worship was to live in alignment with one's divine nature. The Book of the Dead, misnamed by Western Egyptologists who could not understand what they were reading, is not a book about physical death. It is a guide for the soul to navigate the layers of illusion, to strip away every false identity, every limiting belief, every fear-constructed self, until it stands before the scale of Ma'at and is weighed. The question was never, were you good enough? The question was always, did you live as what you truly were? That question, that ancient, sacred, terrifying question, is still the most important question any human being can face. Did you live as what you truly were? Part 9: Northeast, How to Accord IVT What Washington S. Al Washington YS There. Here is where many spiritual teachings fail the people who need them most. They describe the destination with great poetry and then leave you standing at the beginning of the road with no map. The ancient traditions were more practical than they are often given credit for. The mystery schools, the Pythagorean Brotherhood, the Hermetic orders, the Sufi tariqas, the Kabbalistic yeshivas, the Vedantic ashrams, they did not merely talk about enlightenment and awakening. They built systems, rigorous, repeatable, demanding systems for cultivating the conditions in which the deeper self could emerge. And while the outer forms varied enormously, the inner principles were remarkably consistent. The first is silence. In a world designed to keep you perpetually stimulated, perpetually reactive, perpetually distracted, the single most radical act you can perform to sit in silence long enough to hear yourself think, not the surface thoughts, the to-do lists, and the social anxieties, and the replayed conversations. Beneath those, the Sufi mystics called the space beneath ordinary thought Al-Sir, the secret. The Hindu tradition calls it Turiya, the fourth state of consciousness that underlies waking, dreaming, and dreamless sleep. The Christian contemplatives called it the ground of the soul. They all point to the same place, the silence beneath the noise of your own mind, where something that is not thought but is aware of thought waits patiently, timelessly, infinitely to be recognized. The second is truth, not the comfortable truth, not the truth that makes you look good, not the truth other people want to hear, but the raw, sometimes brutal, always liberating truth of what you actually are, what you actually feel, what you actually want, and what you actually know. The third is surrender, not the surrender of defeat, but the surrender of the ego's desperate, exhausting attempt to control everything. The ancient Taoists called this Wu Wei effortless action, moving with the river rather than against it, trusting the intelligence of the larger pattern rather than insisting that your small self knows better. Part 10. The responsibility that MES with knowing. There is a gravity to what we are discussing here that must not be avoided, because one of the great temptations on the spiritual path, and the ancient teachers all warned about this with great seriousness, is to turn the recognition of one's divine nature into a new form of ego inflation, to go from I am worthless to I am the chosen one, and therefore above ordinary obligations, is not awakening. It is the same wound wearing a more spectacular costume. The ancient teachers were unmistakably clear about what happens when genuine recognition of one's divine nature occurs. Service, not because you are commanded to, not because you fear punishment if you don't, but because when you truly see the divine in yourself, you cannot help but see it in everyone else. And once you see it in everyone else, indifference becomes genuinely impossible. The Bodhisattva ideal of Buddhism, the vow to remain engaged with the world until all beings are liberated, is not a moral demand placed on the unwilling. It is the natural expression of a heart that has truly opened. The ancient Hebrew concept of Tikkun Olam, the repair of the world, understood that the work of the spiritually awakened is not to escape the world but to heal it, piece by piece, moment by moment, relationship by relationship. The great Sufi poet Rumi did not write his ecstatic verses so that people could feel good about themselves and go home unchanged. He wrote them to break something open, to shatter the shell of self-protective numbness that keeps human beings from their own greatness and from genuine connection with one another. You carry something, the ancient books confirm it, but what you carry is not for you alone. It never was. The candle was not lit to illuminate only itself. Part 11. The World Northeast EDS, what only you can give. In 2026, as these words reach you, the world is in the middle of something that every genuine spiritual tradition warned was coming, a period of great unraveling, of old systems breaking down, of certainties dissolving, of identities fracturing, of the distance between what humanity has been told it is and what it actually is becoming impossible to ignore. The ancient Hopi prophecy called this the Great Purification. The Hindu tradition called it the end of Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, confusion, and spiritual amnesia. The Zoroastrian tradition called it the final battle between Ashur and Druj, truth and lie, that precedes the renewal of the world. The Mayan calendar, so misunderstood by popular culture, did not predict the end of the world. It predicted the end of a cycle and the beginning of a new one, characterized by a shift in human consciousness from separation to unity. Every tradition, in its own way, pointed to this time as both the most dangerous and the most sacred in human history. And here is what none of these traditions say will save the world: more technology, more politics, more economics, more military power. What they say with one astonishing voice across every culture and century is that the world will be transformed by awakened human beings, by people who have done the inner work, by people who know who they are, by people who have been through the fire and come out carrying light instead of ash, by people who refuse to accept the smallness the world tried to assign them, by people who remember even when everyone around them forgets that there is something sacred moving through all of this. That is not someone else. Do you understand? That is you. That is why you are watching this video right now. In this specific season of your life, that is why something in you resonated with this title. Before you knew what you would find here, the world does not need you to be perfect. It needs you to be awake. Part 12, the final revelation of the ancient books. We have traveled a long way together in this video, through ancient Egypt and the Vedas, through Gnostic scrolls and Kabbalistic texts, through Hermetic principles and Sufi poetry, through shamanic traditions and Buddhist philosophy, across thousands of years, across every continent, in down scenes of languages, through empires that rose and fell and rose again. The same message has been carried, hidden in plain sight, encoded in myth and symbol and ritual and sacred architecture and mystical poetry, waiting for the moment, this moment, when enough people were ready to hear it without the veil of allegory. And here it is, the final revelation that the ancient books have been trying to tell you across all of this time. You are not a human being having a spiritual experience. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin wrote that in the 20th century, but the ancient world knew it thousands of years before him. You are not a body that sometimes has transcendent moments. You are transcendence itself, temporarily wearing a body, temporarily moving through a particular stretch of space and time, for purposes that are both personal and cosmic simultaneously. The chosen one was never meant to be a category that applied to one person while excluding 7 billion others. It was always meant to describe the moment of recognition, the moment any human being chooses to remember what they are beneath all the forgetting. Every soul that has ever walked this earth was born with the capacity for that recognition, but not every soul chooses it. Not every soul is willing to pay the price of honesty, of courage, of surrendering the comfortable smallness that the world offers as a substitute for genuine life. You are here. You chose to listen. You are already in the process of choosing, and that single, sacred, radically personal act of turning toward truth is what the ancient books were always pointing to. Not a Messiah coming from outside, but the Messiah within every human heart that chooses in this moment, and then the next, and then the next to wake up. Oh, UTRO the charge. So here is your charge as you leave this space today. Not a to-do list, not a 7-step plan, a charge in the ancient sense of the word, the sense in which a knight was charged by a king, or a prophet was charged by the divine. Carry what you know. Don't shrink from it to make others comfortable. Don't hide it to fit inside boxes that were built for smaller versions of you. Don't wait for the world's permission to become what you already are. The ancient texts did not describe a chosen one who waited until circumstances were perfect, until opposition disappeared, until everyone around them understood and approved. They described someone who moved anyway, someone who chose anyway, someone who loved anyway, trusted anyway, gave anyway, built anyway in the face of uncertainty, in the face of loss, in the face of the kind of darkness that makes ordinary human beings give up and go home. You are not ordinary. You have never been ordinary. The very fact that these words are landing somewhere deep and true in you right now, the fact that some part of you is not surprised by any of this, only reminded is the confirmation that was written in the ancient books long before you arrived here. Go, live it. The world is waiting, and it has been waiting. Specifically for you. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Gustav Jung.